No, I want to heal this country. This is a war. We've been through a war. We have an invisible as opposed to a visible enemy. I think in many ways the invisible enemy is much more dangerous, is much tougher. In the G7 today, I went through country after country. We were there. We all get along great. Angela Merkel and Shinzo Abe, Prime Minister of Japan, and all of them. And their countries have been devastated by this. Their economies have been devastated by this. 184 countries all over the world. And we went through one after another. And I was angry because this should have been told to us. It should have been told to us early. It should have been told to us a lot sooner. People knew it was happening, and people didn't want to talk about it. I don't know why, but we're going to get to the bottom of it. But people should have.
China, or
I'm not saying anything. I'm saying people should have told us about this. They should have told the rest of the world too. When I looked at Germany talking today, when I looked at France talking today, the European Union was there represented. That represents a lot of countries. Their economies have been devastated, but they're going to build them back. But we're going to build this economy back bigger, better, stronger than ever before. You watch.
I mean, even George Orwell would watch this press conference and get creeped out, because we've finally reached the all too predictable peak of Trump's gaslighting, and that is that he's just beside himself upset that no one managed to tell him about coronavirus, notwithstanding the fact that it was him who spent weeks downplaying or even outright denying its existence. So at the risk of wasting any time, let's jump right into it and give a timeline of every single recorded moment that Trump was warned about the pandemic he just pretended not to have been told about, but opted instead to ignore it. On January 18th, Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar first briefed Trump on the threat of the virus. Trump waited until 4 days later, on January 22nd, to acknowledge it publicly himself, and that was only to say this.
Have you been briefed by the CDC?
I have.
Are there words about a pandemic at this point?
No, we're not at all, and we have it totally under control.
On January 23rd, the WHO, which Trump is now blaming for blindly capitulating to China, wrote on its website, "It's expected that further international exportation of cases may appear in any country. Thus, all countries should be prepared for containment, including active surveillance, early detection, isolation, and prevention of onward spread of COVID-19 infection." Meanwhile, a day after that, on January 24th, Trump tweeted, "China has been working very hard to contain the coronavirus. The United States greatly appreciates their efforts and transparency. It will all work out well." Something to think about when Trump blames the WHO for caving to China, when in fact he was the one yielding to China while the WHO was warning about the virus. On January 27th, White House aides met with then acting Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney to try and get senior officials to take the virus more seriously. On January 29th, Trump's economic advisor Peter Navarro warned the White House in a memo that coronavirus could take more than 500,000 American lives and cost $6 trillion in economic damage. On January 30th, Azar called Trump again, saying that the virus could become a pandemic. Trump criticized Azar as being, quote, alarmist. That was the same day that the WHO declared the coronavirus a global health emergency. It was only the 5th time they've taken that step in the last 15 years. The very next day, Trump sat down for an interview with Hannity and said this.
How concerned are you?
Well, we pretty much shut it down.
On February 5th, senators urged the Trump administration in a briefing to take the virus more seriously and asked if additional funds would be necessary. The White House subsequently made no requests for any emergency funding. A few days later, Trump would say this.
You know, a lot of people think that goes away in April with the heat, as the heat comes in. Typically, that will go away in April. We're in great shape, though.
On February 14th, health officials and the NSC drafted a memo to present to Trump that would recommend the use of, quote, quarantine and isolation measures. The meeting was canceled. On February 21st, the White House Coronavirus Task Force conducted a mock exercise of the pandemic and concluded that the U.S. would need to implement aggressive social distancing. On February 23rd, Navarro wrote another memo addressed directly to the president, stating that up to 2 million Americans could die. On February 25th, the director of the National Center for Immunization and Respiratory Diseases publicly warned of the virus and said, quote, "We need to be preparing for significant disruption in our lives." Trump called Azar fuming because her remarks caused the stock market to fall. 2 days later, Trump said this.
It's going to disappear. One day, it's like a miracle. It will disappear.
On March 4th, nearly a month after health officials began warning that social distancing would be needed, Trump suggested that people infected with the virus could still be going to work.
You know, we have thousands or hundreds of thousands of people that get better just by sitting around and even going to work. Some of them go to work.
On March 6th, Trump promised that any American who wanted a test could get a test, which was not only a lie then, it's still a lie today. And then he likened the outbreak to his own impeachment.
But as of right now and yesterday, anybody that needs a test, that's the important thing. And the tests are all perfect. Like the letter was perfect. The transcription was perfect, right? This was not as perfect as that, but pretty good.
And that's just the immediate timeline. That's not to mention that the Obama administration warned incoming Trump administration officials in January of 2017 of what could become the worst influenza pandemic since 1918. That's not to mention US intelligence reports from January and February that warned about a likely pandemic. That's not to mention a spate of other countries around the world taking aggressive steps to mitigate the impacts. So Trump could try his hardest to rewrite history and pretend that he's beside himself angry that he wasn't told about this, but all that shows is that he knows what he did was wrong. If he was proud of what he did and the steps he took, he wouldn't be so desperate to distance himself from the facts. And while he might be banking on the entire country buying his lies, the American people can clearly see what's happening here, and no amount of faux outrage from the president is going to change that.